On today's episode of Taking the Floor, I get to interview my co-host Bijal Toprani, and we'll talk about everything from people's misconceptions about pelvic PT to Bijal's go-to karaoke song. Get ready to know one of the voices behind this podcast and one of the brains behind your Hinge Health program.
Welcome to Taking the Floor, the podcast from Hinge Health about pelvic health, movement, and taking charge of your well-being.
We're your hosts. I'm Kandis Daroski.
And I'm Bijal Toprani.
And we're both pelvic health physical therapists here at Hinge Health. Thanks for being here. All right, guys, you might have listened to the episode where Bijal put on her Oprah hat and interviewed me. And it was such an amazing conversation. But Bijal, I have been so eager to switch places and ask you so many questions about your work and your life. And, not to toot our own horns too much, you guys, but the PTs behind this program are also just really interesting and impressive people. And Bijal is definitely in that category.
Thanks, Kandis. Super excited.
Okay, so let's kick off things in a fun way, and we'll just get straight into it with our rapid fire speed round. Okay, so I'm going to ask you a question and excited to hear your responses. So, Bijal, what is your favorite candy?
I think it would have to be the green apple sour punch straws.
Okay, so what is your go-to karaoke song?
I'd have to say like a good female voice. Like I love Alanis Morissette. I love Alicia Keys. I like Dido, the Cranberries. Anybody that's like strong woman voice that I can just like belt out. So one of those.
Okay, and speaking about kind of strong women and voices, what is your favorite quote or just general life advice?
I think right now, this quote that says, let me make sure I get it right. Like, we judge ourselves on our intentions, but we judge others on their actions. That's like been helping me give people a lot of grace recently. And so I think that's my favorite one right now.
Let's share with our listeners what your favorite way to move your body is.
So I kind of just like listen to whatever it is that my body's telling me to do, and I kind of do that. But I would say weightlifting, like heavy weightlifting, is one of my favorite ways. I just feel really powerful and really excited when I'm at the gym, just like doing like a traditional weightlifting workout.
I agree. Those things are always just so empowering. Now, I'm wondering how you deal with life when things get a little hectic or stressful.
Oh gosh, this is something I always am working on too. There's a bunch of ways I get a little overstimulated easily. So if I'm very stressed out, I try to like reduce the amount of stimulation that's coming in. So maybe I'll just like lay down on my back and like listen to a podcast, or try to go on a walk. So just reducing the amount of noise in my brain and even in my environment is kind of how I try to deal with stress when things get kind of intense.
All right, friend. So let's get a little deeper now, and we're going to take it back to the beginning. Can you tell us a little bit more about you personally? So, where are you from? Tell us about your family, all of those fun details.
Yeah, for sure. So I grew up in Southern California, like about 40 miles east of LA proper. So I lived there for forever. My parents actually still live in the same condo that I was brought home as a little baby. They've been living there for like 41 years now. So I was born and raised there, lived there until I was like ready to go to graduate school. And then I moved to Arizona to go to grad school for a bit. And then now I live in New York. So I've been living in New York for like 3 years now.
I love that you're like the big city to my small town. And that you're just like, you have such an interesting travel history. So I always like to hear about your path. And then, sort of that token question that we get often, which is kind of like, what made you want to be a physical therapist in the first place?
Yeah. So I was one of those like lost birds, like when I was in college. Like I changed my mind and my major like a million times. I was like, I'm going to be a business person. I didn't even know what that meant, but I was like, I'm going to go into business and like, oh, I'm going to be a lawyer. And then growing up, I always thought I'd be a teacher. And like every year that I would be in school, I'd be like, I'm going to be a first grade teacher. And then I'd go to second grade and I'd be like, now I'm going to be a second grade teacher. And I actually like would save all of my like homework because I thought I would use like that to create my curriculum when I became a teacher. Like this is all true. And my mom would be like, you're kind of being a hoarder and I need you to throw things away. So physical therapy, it wasn't one of those things that I was like, oh, I've always wanted to be a PT. But when I was in college, I went to UCLA and I started working at the Wooden Center, which is like the gym on campus. And it's this like big, beautiful gym. And I got trained to be a fitness instructor. So I went through this whole program so I could teach like weightlifting, and I started teaching step aerobics. And the feeling that I got from teaching group classes was like so simple. It was like, I love to help people move. Like people moving makes them happier. And I want to be part of that journey. And so that was what kind of made me think, okay, what profession includes like a big movement component? And then I landed on physical therapy. And I also wanted to be a PT because I felt like out of other healthcare professionals, I always viewed physical therapists as getting more one-on-one time with patients and getting to like build rapport a little bit more.
That's so interesting and so true, right? There's really never a time when you like exercise and feel worse after. You generally always like do feel a lot more positive and better. I'm curious, knowing that part of your story, what led you to kind of pursue this additional, education and really become a champion of pelvic floor physical therapy?
For the pelvic floor part of it, I've always really been an advocate for like talking about the things that maybe aren't the easiest to talk about. I've always like talked about gender inequalities and stuff. Like I swear I came out of the womb like asking questions like, why do I have to sit ladylike and like men don't have to sit manlike? Like, I've just always kind of been questioning stuff. I'm Indian, so I come from like a little bit more of a conservative background. And I think pelvic floor PT to me, when I learned about it in school, was like one of those types of things where it was like, it covered a lot of the topics that are not easy to talk about, are the more taboo things. And I was like, okay, well, I would love to help raise awareness for those symptoms and then also really help women who are suffering from them. I felt like that whole like, my mom always called me rebel without a cause. It kind of was turning from without a cause to having a cause so I could still really be that empowering individual, but also be making a difference in like people's lives.
So true. And you heard it here, folks. She's a mover and a shaker. And we're really glad to have her here at Hinge Health doing that alongside, a bunch of other movers and shakers. And so I get this question a lot, or I guess I think about this a lot. And that is sort of like, what do you perceive as the biggest differences between what people think you do as a pelvic floor physical therapist and what you actually do as a pelvic floor physical therapist?
I think when people think of pelvic floor PT or think what I do, I think they think I'm doing like a lot of internal exams and like an internal work, which is not the case. Like I think people immediately think that, oh, pelvic floor PT, like you're going to have to do a lot of hands-on work. And I think there's a lot of discomfort in that, but what pelvic floor PT actually is, and even in the in-person environment, I wasn't doing a lot of internal, exams all the time. What it actually is like assessing a lot of lifestyle factors. And I think that people don't really realize that. Like, I am going to ask so many questions without even ever needing to place a hand on the person. Like, what are your bladder habits like? Like, How many times a day are you going to the bathroom? Oh, what are you drinking? What are you eating? And I think people don't really realize like that aspect of it.
Are you comfortable getting into a little bit of TMI territory with me here?
I literally live in TMI territory. So yes, please.
Awesome. Okay. So we as pelvic floor physical therapists talk a lot about, peeing, pooping, sexual intercourse. And so much of our daily routine is impacted by our pelvic health. And, so I'm wondering, can you think of any ways that your daily habits have changed since you've become a pelvic floor physical therapist?
Yeah, there's a couple of things. I mean, I think for one, breathing. We talk about breathing a lot, but I think that I think about breathing when I'm at the gym. I mentioned weightlifting more now than I ever have before, really like that exhale on the exertion, because I'm thinking about the impact that, having not so great breathing patterns can have on my pelvic floor. So I think that's one of the ways that it shows up the most and is different than the way I used to think before all of my pelvic floor training. And then another thing is like, I've always, ever since I can remember, having to get like pelvic exams, like at your annual visit or a pap smear or whatever it may be, that process for me was always super anxiety inducing. And it was also really painful. And I used to just think that that was a normal thing. And now when I get those exams, I actually know that I can take a deep breath to really kind of lengthen my pelvic floor during some of those exams. And it's helped tremendously and reduce the pain a lot. So I think breathing is like the biggest shift that I've had pre and post pelvic floor training, because I really didn't know about the impact of breathing before.
Okay, so let me ask you, do you find that your friends and family routinely come to you for advice on these kinds of personal topics that we just chatted about? So in other words, are you kind of the women's health expert of your friend group?
I do get people asking for advice, but normally that's on like a one-on-one kind of, I'll get like the text after the group hangout is over being like, hey, what do you think about, this? Most of the questions are around incontinence. And I think that that's, it's super, super common for people to have urinary leakage. I'm 34, so I'm in the age where a lot of my friends have just had, maybe their first kid, they're planning for their second kid. So there's a lot of questions around like, what can I do? What kind of tools can I have in my toolbox to make sure that once I deliver, I can have the healthiest pelvic floor? So it definitely does happen quite a lot.
And, actually something that I'm not sure I've ever explicitly asked you or had a conversation with you about is kind of just like, what is your pelvic floor PT passion? What is that treatment area that just really you're very passionate about raising awareness about or treating? I think everybody has their thing that they really get excited about. And so what is yours?
Mine definitely is like bladder retraining. It's treating those incontinence symptoms. And I think one of the reasons why is because I'm a very analytical person. I like when things are a little bit more of a recipe, a little bit more straightforward. And I think that bladder retraining can be one of those things. When you have someone fill out a bladder diary, you have so much objective data, boom, right in front of your face. Like, oh, this is how many times you're going to the restroom. This is how many times you're leaking. And it kind of gives us a really solid starting point to then be able to implement some exercises and some lifestyle factors, and then be able to fill out that bladder diary again, after 6 weeks or after 12 weeks and see, oh, look, this column used to be a little bit of a mess and now it's a lot better and you're leaking less. So I love treating people that are suffering from urinary leakage.
I know that they really appreciate you as well and your passion for helping them along that journey. So let's switch gears and play some Mad Libs. So I'm going to read a question and then you fill in the blank. Okay. First one up is, as a pelvic floor physical therapist, I wish every person would think about blank before or after working out.
Breathing. I think breathing. I know that should be during, but really thinking about before they start, hey, how should I breathe through this workout? Is there one exercise I could implement some good breathing habits through? And then after, maybe assessing, how did I do? Did I breathe, optimally during one or two exercises? Again, I never ever want perfect to be the enemy of good, right? We're only trying to make sure that maybe one or two exercises are being done with that nice breathing pattern. But yeah, that would be my answer, breathing.
Next up, as a pelvic floor physical therapist, I never or almost never blank.
Hover over the toilet. I'm going to say it though, I'm not a germaphobe. I never have been. So it's really easy for me to just sit right down. But yeah, I never ever hover over the toilet seat.
Your pelvic floor is thanking you. As a pelvic floor physical therapist, I always, or really try to, blank.
Stay hydrated throughout the day. So I try to take little sips of water all day long instead of chugging a lot of it in one go.
Even as a pelvic floor physical therapist, I still wish I was better at blank.
Managing my constipation symptoms. Clearly TMI is not a thing, but I grew up vegetarian. So I was vegetarian until I was like 26. And a lot of my diet for a long time, and even now, is like bread and pasta and pizza and like things that really can make me constipated. And so I have to be really intentional about like having more fiber, having more vegetables, making sure that like I'm not having to strain when I go. So I still wish I was better at that.
As a pelvic floor physical therapist, make sure you talk to your gynecologist about blank at your next checkup.
Make sure you talk about what's going on with your pelvic floor in general. Like, are you having pain when you have sex? Are you chronically constipated? Are you leaking urine? Even if they don't ask necessarily a laundry list of those questions, it's great to bring up pelvic floor concerns with your gynecologist because it's good for it to be on their radar. And it'll be interesting to see, whether they refer you to a pelvic floor PT or whether they have some tools for you. And it's also my way of us fighting the good fight and making sure that pelvic floor care is really being seen by all healthcare providers. And it's kind of just like on the radar for all healthcare providers out there.
Yes, I'm all about fighting the good fight. So +1 to that. I want to shift and really talk about some of the ways that your career has impacted you. So what would you say is the most satisfying thing about seeing people as a pelvic floor physical therapist?
The most satisfying thing is seeing progress. So I mentioned, that bladder diary earlier. It's just really nice to hear small bits of progress from my patients. So when they say like, normally I would leak every single time I would laugh, but last week, I laughed a few times and I only leaked once or twice, versus every single time. So that's one of the most satisfying things. And then I also hear a lot from women who, might have a few children, have an aha moment and say, I never thought about this with like my first, but like now with my second baby, I did start pelvic floor PT, before I gave birth, and it made a really big impact on my recovery, or it made a really big impact on the actual birthing process. And so just kind of seeing people start to have a little bit of a buy-in and recognize like how transformative it has been for them, and in their own lives.
And aren't they just so satisfying? I mean, I think something that a lot of our members don't realize is that they change our lives on a daily basis, and I think there's this perception that's like, we're here to help them. And we are like 100%, but we take a little piece of every person that we work with us, and it makes us a better clinician as we move forward. Okay. Finally, you've spent your days for years, really being a champion for change and treating people's pelvic floor problems. Why did you want to host this podcast, and what do you hope that people will get out of it?
I think that when you are armed with knowledge, it takes any process of improving from a passive process where people are, doing things to you or telling you exactly what to do, into an active process where you think, oh, I heard that thing on the podcast, about breathing or about bladder habits, and I'm not going to do X, Y, and Z because I learned that, on the podcast or in an article. That's a really satisfying thing for me because I'm that way. I want to be armed with as much education as possible when it comes to my own health. And so that was a huge motivator for me to do this podcast. I was like, okay, let's arm people with knowledge, and let's do it in a way that maybe everyone doesn't want to read an article. I personally like to read a lot, but I also know that sometimes when I listen to information, I tend to digest it a little bit better. So I just wanted to create another forum for people to learn and to empower themselves and make this process more active rather than a passive process.
Okay, it's time for our self-care check-in. What's a non-negotiable for you this week when it comes to taking care of yourself, Bijal?
So I have fully fallen off of the exercise wagon. So for 8 days, I haven't done an actual exercise. So today is the day, jumping back on the wagon. I'm going for a run later on after my work day is done. What about you? What's going on this week?
There's a lot going on for me this week. So end of the year with preschool aged kids just brings a lot of things. And so I am asking for help. I'm accepting help, which is a really big thing I need to work on. And I think that just looks like listing out all the things that we need to get done as a family and plugging in those that do offer to help. Sometimes as a mom, you want to be able to just do it all. You're like, I'm just going to do it all. I don't need help from anybody. But the fact is that I do have a great support team and they would be tickled to help me out. So I'm going to accept that.
I'm very proud of you for accepting the help. Good job. All right. Thanks so much for listening, everyone. Remember, if you're dealing with pelvic floor issues, you are not alone and we're here for you. The information contained in this podcast is intended to be used for educational purposes only and does not constitute medical advice or treatment for any specific condition. Please consult with your healthcare provider with any questions you may have about your medical condition or treatment. Check out our Hinge Health app library for new episodes coming soon.